We're fishing with Major League Fishing pro Mike McClelland on Fayette County Reservoir, Texas.
You know, probably one of the biggest things that anytime I'm throwing a crankbait, one of the biggest keys, it isn't necessarily the layout of the bank, it isn't necessarily, you know, the depth of the bank. It's normally always got to do with hard bottom. You know, there's all kinds of different things that you can be looking for. You know, you can fish things like we're fishing here, riprap of the dam. You can fish out off the end of a long point or just covering a depth zone with a particular crankbait. Go. It's another good one on that MD. You know, I talked about earlier the difference in, you know, the depth versus the body size. Earlier I caught a few on that little RK50, but I really felt like, you know, basically after, you know, seeing what some of these fish are feeding on, that I needed a little bit bigger body frame, and that's the reason I went to that MD55. Basically, I'm fishing the very same depth, but I'm able to get that bait down to that depth in a bigger profile. Good little fish. You know, there's a lot of things when you look at what all these electronics will do today that you just kind of, there's a fish right there. You kind of take it for granted. I mean, they're so good now that there's not a ton of stuff that you have to do. But there's one thing when it comes to setting up my sonar that I still want to do, and that is I typically always want to run my gain in manual. It's just one of those things that to me makes a huge difference. Nice one. So getting back to the electronics, I mean, I want to run it in manual, and the other thing I always want to do is I want to have my A-scope on. When you look at this unit right here, anything that you're seeing between this line and the beginning of the history is actually there. That is live sonar. Everything from here over is memory. So I always want my live scope or my A-scope running, and I always want to make sure I'm running my gain in manual. The reason I do that is when you get around other boats, your unit will actually try to start adjusting itself down automatically because of the interference. If I'm running mine in manual, I know I'm going to see every target that I want to see in the water. That one right there. I mean, they have decided to eat. You know, probably the biggest thing about throwing a crankbait is the fact that you can catch fish literally from, you know, 0 to 20, 25 foot of water even now with all of the different variations of crankbaits we've got. I mean, the biggest thing you as an angler have got to do is make sure you're throwing the right crankbait for the right situation. I mean, when you're talking about catching them in 0 to 3 foot of water, you're going to be throwing a square bill of some kind. If you're talking about catching them in that mid-depth range, you've got to be throwing a bait that dives at that depth range. And when you get out to that, you know, ultra deep stuff, I mean, a bait like the Little John DD, the deepest diving DD, and now he's even got a deeper diving DD that, you know, will get 20, 22 foot deep. So, you know, you start talking about long line and guys catch fish on crankbaits 25 and 30 foot deep. So a crankbait will catch them at about any depth if you can get the bait to where the fish are living.